Figured we'd skip it for today. So it's lesson 3 of Intro to Web Programming. Just before we get started today, I wanted to get your thoughts. This is a couple years old, but I always like to show it to my classes. Not sure if you can read it or not. As soon-to-be professional developers, what's your reaction to this? Have any opinions about this developer's approach to accounts receivable? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
It's kind of tough.
Okay, you think it's a little bit harsh? Any other opinions? What do you think? So obviously this developer built the site for somebody who didn't pay them, so they took the site down and instead on this client's domain put this sign up telling the world that this client didn't pay their bill. Would you take this approach?
Well, obviously, if it was going to be client specific, it would be attention so-and-so due to your non-payment.
Mm-hmm. Do you like this approach or not so much?
I think I'd just sue them. Let them have their website and sue them. I'd get more money than they would have paid the other ones.
Okay. Any other opinions? Raj, what do you think?
Not really.
Why don't you like it?
I will continue to work because this will show that I'm a money-minded person or something.
Okay.
And
Fair point.
So you don't want just others to use your work without paying you anything.
Yes, that's true. Okay. What could we do to prevent this? Right? We should hopefully not find ourselves in this situation. It could happen, but what are some things we could or should do if someone comes to you and says, hey, you're a programming student or you're a web student, I've got a project, are you interested in making some extra money, getting a little experience? What things should we do in the course of that conversation to hopefully avoid being the situation that this developer found themselves in? We can't always prevent this problem, but we can reduce the chances we're going to wind up here. What should you do? Yeah, well, how do you, before you ever start a project, what things can we do that will help make it more likely that we get paid?
You gotta talk business first before you do any work.
Okay, so what does that mean?
You gotta.
Yeah, okay, so that's an important one. You need a contract. You need something in writing that explains exactly what kind of work you're going to do and how much you're going to do and how much they're going to pay you for it, right? Because if you don't have that agreement in writing and you do all this work and you spend all this time and then the client decides not to pay you, you don't have much recourse, right? You don't have an easy way to go back to them and demand payment. They don't want to pay you. So number one is you have to have an agreement in writing. Okay, that's really important. Now, what about the terms of when you think you should get paid? Let's say we're going to build a web application for somebody. We're in school, so we're not able to do it full time. Let's say we figure it's going to take us maybe 100 hours total. Okay. If you think about, most of you are taking 6 courses. Some of you have other part-time jobs or families. If you knew you had to do 100 hours worth of work outside of school, and you were going to start, let's say a client said, I want you to start, the beginning of February. How long do you think you would need to do it? Realistically, how many extra hours a week could you work if you had to? Right now? How much free time would you have to do a paid project? 5 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 50 hours a week? 10 to 15 hours a week? Okay, that's probably a reasonable guess. So you need to spend 100 hours and you say, I've got 10 hours a week, right? Because I'm still going to be in school until the end of April. So if we started at the beginning of February, your project's going to be done when? Sometime near the end of the semester, right? Middle of April. 10 hours a week for 10 weeks, starting in February. So we get into April, right? So if I sign a contract with you today, you're going to build a website for me, it's going to take you 100 hours. And you've got 10 hours a week. When do you want to get paid? What would be fair and reasonable? When should I pay you and how much do you think? What would be fair?
some upfront and some after the fact when you show it on the website.
Okay, so you could say I want some money right now when I start and some when I finish. Okay, that's one idea. Any other thoughts? How else could you do it?
You can agree to pay some amount of money every week.
Okay, so it could be weekly. Weekly's maybe a bit tough because it's a lot of paperwork and administration, or every 2 weeks, or maybe every month. I'll bill you at the end of February, end of March, and then at the end. So it's generally a good idea to avoid this. We usually want to ask for a series of at least installments. So most projects that I do, I will ask my client for 3 installment payments. Something like 30% right at the beginning before I ever start. Let me tell you something. If you say to a client, you sign a contract and you say, I want 30% up front, and they say no, I have news for you. If they won't pay you at the beginning of the job, they're not going to pay you at the end of the job. Okay, so that's how you can tell if your client is serious or not. Someone who won't give you anything at all at the beginning is someone you don't want to do business with. So typically I'll ask for 30% at the beginning, 30% in the middle somewhere, maybe when I have like a beta site ready, I have something they can test, but it's not finished. But they can see I've been working and there's some kind of product there they can use. And then maybe 40% at the end when they sign off, all the work is done and that application goes into production. So this way, if I start working, if at the end they don't want to pay me, well, they've already paid me 60% of the money. So at that point, they're probably not going to walk away at that point if they pay in installments. Okay. So we should always ask for some money up front. If you can get half the money up front, that's great. Most people won't give you half the money up front, but you could try. What's typically standard for many development projects is 30 to 35%. That's a normal advance on a development project. And a serious client will sign a contract and they'll give you that money. And you don't start working until they've paid you that advance. Once they've paid at the beginning, they're more likely to pay all the way through. Okay. Now, one other important point. We can do all those things. We can have a contract. We can get paid advance. It will still happen sometimes, hopefully not very often, but occasionally a client is still going to say, I'm not paying you. There's really only 2 reasons why they will say I'm not paying, like at the end of the project. What would be the 2 reasons that somebody could have for not paying you? There's only 2 possibilities. Okay, so they don't want to pay you is one possibility. What's the other possibility? Well, that would be, yeah, the same thing. So they're not happy with the work, so they can pay you, but they're choosing not to because they have an issue with the work you've done. Right. The other option is sometimes they actually don't have the money. They know they owe you the money. They want to pay their bill, but maybe their business has gone like that. And they plan to have money to pay and they don't. Okay. Here's a very simple way. What could you do? How can you tell when someone says, I can't pay you? How do you know if they can pay you and they don't want to pay you, or they actually want to pay you, but they can't? There's a really simple way to tell. What could you do? Because you want to know who you're dealing with. You could. Here's a solution that usually works. Let's say they owe you, so at the end of the project, they owe you $2,000. And they say, I'm sorry, I don't have $2,000 to pay you right now. I want to pay you, but I don't have the money. Right? That might be true, or they may be lying to you. Here's the way you find out easily. I say, okay, Utah, fine. You don't have $2,000 right now. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to give me $500 now. And I want you to give me 3 checks, one for next month, one for 2 months, one for 3 months, each for $500. But I want you to give me all those checks right now. And then I don't have to ask you for money. So rather than giving me $2,000 today, I'll take $500 each month for the next 4 months. So you can pay, but I'll give you more time to pay. If Utah's an honest guy and he wants to pay, he just doesn't have $2,000 right now, he's going to agree to that. If he has no intention of paying me, he's going to come up with a reason why he doesn't want to do that. And that's how you know whether the client wants to pay you and simply can't, or whether they're trying to avoid paying you for the work that you've done. So that question, the honest clients they'll always agree to that. If you give them more time and let them pay in installments, somebody will pay you. And most of the time that works. Someone who doesn't want to pay you, they'll come up with an excuse why that won't work. And then your only remedy is really take your contract and go to small claims court. Any contracts under $25,000 in Ontario, you can go to small claims court, which means you don't have lawyers. So you just go, you give the contract and you'd say why the work you did and you're owed the money. Rarely should you have to do that if you have a contract. This isn't a great approach in my opinion. Right? It's not very professional. Doesn't speak well of you to other potential clients. Right? If you have an issue with somebody, this probably isn't the best way to air your grief with them publicly. I don't recommend it. And I doubt this guy's getting his money. Nothing wrong with taking someone's website offline if they haven't paid for it, but I probably wouldn't post an announcement like that. I just tell the client, and I've had to do that. If I don't get paid by this time, I will temporarily take your site offline until you pay for it. And then I'll put it right back. And that usually gets you your money real quick.
That's why you're not gonna get more business, because if somebody see it and he's not gonna give you any business.
Absolutely. You know what? It's interesting. That's a very good lesson I've learned is don't burn your bridges with clients. Over the years, 3 of the biggest clients I ever had for various reasons left and went to another company. And I wished them well. I said, good luck. If it doesn't work out, you're welcome to come back. All 3 of them came back and brought me more business later because I wished them well. I didn't burn the bridge. Okay, so it does happen. All right.
So is there a GitHub page that I can go to? Because as you know, I have the difficulty saying out the PHP pages during previous lessons.
Yeah, all of my code is on GitHub. The link to my GitHub page is inside of tools and resources.
Right. Well,
And all of my repositories will start with the word COMP1006.
right. Well,
So you can just browse my repositories and you'll see the dates and you'll see COMP1006 in the repository names. Those would be the ones that you want.
Well, I would appreciate some help during the break.
Okay. All right. So this week, another lovely, rich created graphic for you. So last week we talked about how to use our PHP forms to collect data and send that data off to our database. So we had created our albums table and we built our forms so that we could save a bunch of albums. And if you didn't do this already, please remember I asked you at the end of class last week to make sure that you populated your table with 4 or 5 records. So you just had to fill out your form a few times, or you could have gone to MySQL Workbench and just run some insert commands so that there was some data in your table. So I did that. I'll just fire up my database. And there was our script from last week, which I don't want to execute it again because I don't want to create the table. I already have the table. I'm just going to run the select query by highlighting it. So that's what I've got. I've got 5 records in my table. We started at, as I think Raj suggested, we started at 1,000. So we can see that that auto increment was adding 1 each time. It doesn't assign random IDs. It just assigns the next available ID number. So hopefully your table looks kind of like mine. It doesn't matter if you have different album names. I'm sure you do have different album names. That's fine. I just want to make sure that you have somewhere 4 or 5. If you have more than that, that's fine. Make sure you have some records in your database. If you need to go quickly load up your form and fill it out a few times and submit a few new form records, that's fine. That'll work. We should just be able to do it using our form. So last week we focused on this part of the process, we had an HTML form, submitted some data. It was processed by a PHP page, which connected to the database. We ran an SQL insert command and our data was stored permanently. So something like this happens every time anytime we fill out a form online. We sign up for something, we post a comment, we add something on social media, we upload a file, it's that same process. Our form grabs the data, ships it off to a page that runs some server-side script, and that script saves it into our database. So it's kind of one-way traffic from the browser to the server. What we want to look at today is we want to look at how then, as a user, we can request things in our browser or on a mobile app or any HTTP-enabled device, and how we can send requests to the database, tell the database what we want, and the database is going to stream that content back to us. So maybe that content is a news feed or a friend's profile or a news article. Could be anything at all. Our list of emails in our inbox on our Gmail account. Really any set of data at all that we want to look at. So what we want to do today is we want to take this data that we now have in our database and we want to build some PHP pages that reach in here, pull that data out and make this data visible, this information visible in our browser. And we'll look at different ways of doing it, okay? So the process of this, I'll just pull up a few, go to Georgian for a minute. Let's go into the photos, for example. So on this page, when I choose this particular album, what's happening here? Like, how does this page actually get generated? What's happening here so that Facebook can decide what should be showing up here? We know this is mostly dynamic content. How's it generated? Okay, yep, so it goes into the database. How does it know? Now, Facebook's database is massive, right? Billions and billions and billions of gigabytes of data. So how does it know what data to fetch out of there?
Unique ID.
Right. We can actually see that the album has a unique ID. How can you see? Right. When we click that page, it's passing in that primary key, that ID value, and it pulls up that particular album, right? So we're running a query, a select query, and we're passing that ID value in. So we're not selecting everything in the database. We're selecting just that one list. Okay, so this is going to give us back a list of pictures. And then how is it that the pictures wind up getting displayed? So our query will return probably a list of image file names. And then how do we take that name? What happens on the PHP script?
I would think that the PHP would iterate over every single picture in the file and put it in the position that was offset.
You got it. So we've got this collection or this list or this array, and we're going to iterate or loop through one at a time. And what kind of HTML tag is going to get generated so that each picture is displayed, right? It's not displaying the file name. It's actually showing the picture. So each one of these is going to be in kind of what type of HTML tag? Yeah, it'll be an IMG tag. If I inspect any one of these elements, right, what have we got? We have an IMG tag. So we have a whole series of IMG tags, and here is the actual photo. Here's the source. They've renamed it, and that's the name of the image. So whenever we're selecting data, if I just go back and open this, right? When we look at the wall on a Facebook profile, the exact same process is happening. There's a query that goes into the Facebook database. It says, show me the most recent posts by Georgian College, and iterate through them. Where there is an image included, generate the image tag, but otherwise just print out the text of the post and the timestamp, right? When did they save that post to the database in the first place? So again, here's just another loop displaying all of this stuff. When we go to and here's a book I'm reading right now. I highly recommend it. All of this content is being selected in the Amazon database for this product. All of these are iterated, you know, all the related products. And then all of the comments and reviews, there's 3,200 of them, right? They select them all. And in a loop, they print out the title, the rating, the user, the date, and then the content. So when we talked about, we've been looking at dynamic pages, it's the same thing happening for all the dynamic content that we see. It lives in a database, so there's a select query that fetches it out, and we usually loop through and we print that stuff out on the page. But what HTML we use might vary a bit, right? So for a photo album, we're using IMG tags. Here, we're just presenting this stuff as paragraphs, so we're probably just using P tags. Let's go here for a minute. All of this data is stored in the Sportsnet database. What kind of tags, what sort of HTML tags are used to format this data? We're not using, well, actually, we are using little image tags here. But what other sets of HTML gives us this format?
Table.
Yeah, table. And what other tags work with table? Right. So we're building a grid of rows and columns with TR. In every case, though, we're doing the same thing. We're querying the database, fetching some data, bringing it back to our PHP script, and using a loop to show the data. So the different HTML tags, it's just kind of like the wrapping or the packaging. So we can present our data as in a grid, we present it as a paragraph, we could present it as a series of images. Okay. It's kind of like how we've got options if we're going to go and buy a birthday present for a friend, right? We get a gift, we're going to go and take it to a birthday party. What options do we have to wrap that gift? How could you do it? Okay, gift bag is one. What else might you use besides a gift bag? Wrapping paper. If you're really cheap, what could you use instead of wrapping paper? Too cheap to buy wrapping paper. You're all students. Newspaper, right? If you're really lazy, you cannot wrap it at all. Here's your gift. I didn't bother to wrap it, right? It's the same gift each time, but just the packaging around it, how we present it is different. But it's the same thing. So it's the same with all of this stuff. All of these pages are presenting data, fetching data out of a database and showing it in our browser. We're just using some different HTML wrapping around it so that it looks different. Okay, and then we add CSS to make it look even more customized, where we can control how it looks. But in every case, it's this exact process. Our page connects to the server, runs a query, pulls some data out, and then fetches it back, and then we use HTML to show that information. Here's one other way we commonly see we're going to do this today. If I do this, very often we want to present users with a list of choices, and that list we want to manage through our database. Right? So if I want to copy this lousy picture I created to one of my other courses, when I choose copy, it gives me a drop down, and in the Blackboard database, it selects these are all of the courses that I have access to, right? So I can choose from that list. So learning how to fill a drop down list from a table in the database, well, this is something we're going to need to know how to do. Never in 18 years have I built a website that didn't include drop-down lists that were tied to a database table. So for example, if we think about our album page we built last week, right? One thing we may want to do with it a bit later, I'll just load it up. So here's our album details, right? So right now we could type in the name of the artist. We could have that option that we could create a table with all the artists, and then we could just allow the users to pick from that list. So one of the things we want to look at today is how do we create a drop-down list and connect it up to a table in the database. We want to look at how do we just write plain old HTML that comes from the database. And we also want to look at this. How do we build and structure a data, basically create a grid of data where that data lives in our MySQL database. So we're going to be doing this constantly. I'm just going to show you a quick example of what this might look like in a real application. Okay, where do we use it? Log in here. We can look in the site control panel. It's a few years old, but you'll get the idea. So here's how the site owners manage the website, right? So here's one table. They have a news table in their database. Well, they have a grid that shows all of the news items. So they can add, they can edit, or they can delete them. They have houses for sale. Here's another grid linked to a different table in database that shows all the properties that they're currently selling or they've sold in the past. Here's ones they're renting. Here's all the pages in the website, all the content pages. You'll notice a pattern here, right? To manage all the data, each page gives them a list of what they have in the database. Okay, so let's start. We're going to make a really simple page that connects to our database. And let's say we just want to get it to display the album titles. We won't worry about doing formatting or anything else. We just want to get this basic process to work. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my COMP1006 folder where all the files I've been creating are stored. I'm going to take my lesson 2 folder. I'm just going to copy it and paste it and rename it to lesson 3. And then I'm going to open up my PHP storm and I'll browse into my lesson 3 folder. We're not going to really work with these pages today, but we want them as part of our solution because we're going to use all of them in later weeks. So I'll open up my code editor.
You use Visual Studio for this, right?
Yep. The reason why I prefer using WebStorm is Visual Studio doesn't offer code hinting for PHP, whereas PHP Storm does. So when I hit, object dot, or I type a PHP function, it'll show me the list of parameters, for example. Visual Studio doesn't offer that.
I've done some coding for PHP and past with Adam, but not a lot, and I think that I need some serious help during break regarding the editors and how to link up, especially now that I've beginning control of how to use my SQL Workbench.
Okay, I will have a look, but I mean, we only have 10 minutes. So if you need serious help, then you're probably best to send me an email and make an appointment and come to office time. Okay, because we only have so much class time. And if you grab my files off of GitHub, you will need to be changed. You will want to change. Obviously, that connection string isn't going to work for you. That works for me. So let's go ahead and make a new PHP file for today. Let's call this album titles. So all we want this page to do is connect to the database, run a query, fetch the list of album titles, and print those titles on the page. We don't have to worry about formatting. Doesn't have to look good. We just want it to function. I'll just change my title here. I don't really have to. So what we'll do is we'll walk through all the steps and we'll write out all the comments first before we write any code. I think I said I was going to do this last week and then I started coding. I forgot. So no code until all the comments are listed. So this is going to be somewhere 5, 6, or 7 steps are going to be involved. So as soon as we load this page in the browser, we want our list of album titles to get printed on here. Much like when we load any of these pages that we've been looking at, we don't have to do anything to ask for that content. It just shows up. So what things will we need to do on this page? So our album titles, they live here. And we want these values to be displayed on our PHP page. So what's one step you know we're going to need to do on this page? We're going to need to connect to the database. Absolutely. That'll probably be the first step.
Sir, after we rename the folder, did we change any of the files or
Nope.
create a new PHP from scratch?
You create a new PHP from scratch. Okay, so what else are we going to have to do? We'll obviously have to connect to the database. Any PHP page that's working with our MySQL database has got to have a connection like we did last week. What else will we do on this page? We're going to need to write an SQL query. Yep. Okay. What else do we have to do? Okay. So we'll display the titles using Echo. Yep. Yep. We'll disconnect. You just need 2 steps in here. So we're on the right track. Everything we've done is right. Yeah, so we actually need to execute the query, and we'll need to store the results. So when we run that query, MySQL, if it finds any data that matches, it's going to send us back a chunk of data. So we'll need to store that into an array or a variable. So within the display, Mike, now we need to do what you said when we were looking at the photo album. Right? Before we can display, because we're actually going to display the titles one at a time. So what will we need to do? What structure will we need in order to do this?
While loop.
Yeah, we're going to need some kind of loop. So we're going to fetch the data. We're going to fetch the data. We'll have it in an array. And then we want to loop through that array. And one at a time, we want to print out each value until we reach the end of it. So we will loop through the data. We will use a for each loop to do this. So inside of the loop, we'll print these out one at a time. So this is what's happening on every one of those pages we looked at. When we look at the hockey standings, it prints out each team and all of the numbers associated with the team, and then it loops again and it prints the next line. When we're on Amazon and we look at the comments, it prints out one comment at a time and then goes to the next one. Okay. So anytime we're fetching data and displaying it on the web, this is the process every time. The only thing that maybe will be simpler is sometimes we only want to look up one record, right? I want to see this album only. In that case, we can just skip the loop part. Everything else is the same. We still connect, we set up a query, we execute that query and we store the result, and then we just display the values from our query. We just don't need a loop to do it if we only have one record. So that's the only thing that's going to be different. So this structure, the code we're going to write here, we're going to write it over and over and over again through the course. And in a few weeks, you'll be able to do it no problem because it's so repetitive. So our connection line to our database, this is going to be exactly the same as what we used last week. We said there were 5 things we would need in order to connect this PHP page in here to our MySQL database. What are the 5 pieces of information that will go in that connection? What do we need to know to link them? Okay, what host? Yep.
Username, password.
Username, password. DJ? Are those what you're going to say?
Yeah, sure. I have my hands up, so.
Okay.
Server address.
Yep, so the server address, which is the host, username, password. There are 2 other things we need. Database name and which type of database, which in our case will always be MySQL. So we provide those 5 pieces of information with a valid login, and our page can talk to our database. So we'll set up a connection using this library called PDO, PHP Data Objects. So the first value here is the database driver, which is MySQL. And that's the common database we're going to use with PHP. So now you need to supply your host. So whatever you used last week, use again. If it's your Azure database, fine. If your database is running on DreamHost, fine. If you're working with a local database, that's fine too. And then a semicolon with no spaces. And then you need DB name equals whatever you called your database. So those are the first 3 parameters: type, host or server address, database name. And the last 2 parameters are your username and your password. My password is blank on my server, so I haven't entered in a value, just an empty string for the password. So this line will be identical to what you had in your save album page last week. Once I'm done, as soon as I connect, I'm going to make sure I go down and write my disconnect. Because we talked about last week, we want to make sure we free up those connections so our site doesn't slow down. What did we do to disconnect? It was pretty simple.
Assign a null for connection.
Yeah, we'll just assign our connection object to null. That destroys the object, releases that connection, so some other resource now can use connect to the database. So I like to, typically I like to disconnect at the bottom as soon as I do the connect, that way I don't forget. Now we'll set up our query. What does our SQL command look like that will fetch the album titles, the title values from the table called albums? It's a fairly simple query, shouldn't be too complicated. Yep, that's it. And Kaz, you can get coffee in 10 minutes. Ah, right. Okay, good point. Will this work if we select star? Yes. If we only want the title, are we better off to use star, or should we just select title only? Both will work. I would suggest it would be better just to select the title column. How come? It's not wrong to use star. Our page is still going to work. Why would we be better off in this case to just select the title, do you think? We've got 5 albums in here. How many albums could we have in here? 5 million if we wanted, right? So we're not going to notice any difference when we've only got 5 records. But if this was a big table and this was a popular website with lots of users, right, we'd be selecting 5 times more data than we needed to. So what's that going to do for our query performance? It's going to help it or is it going to slow it down? Yeah, the more we select, the longer the query is going to take to run. So one of the rules is don't select any fields we're not using in our queries because they make things slower. Only select the fields we need. These are case sensitive. If I type title with a capital T here, I'm not going to get any data because in my database, when we set this table up last week, we used all lowercase letters in our table names. Okay, so it has to match exactly. So now we want to set up a command object and run it, and then store the results of our query. We need 3 lines of PHP code to do this. So we're going to prepare a new command with our connection and our SQL. You sleeping? Following along? Typing with one hand? I thought you were magically typing with one hand and one eye open and one hand, which would have been a neat trick. So then we execute our query. So these 2 lines are identical to what we had last week when we did save. But now we need to add something new. We'll add in, we'll create a variable called albums. And we're going to call fetch all. This will get all the rows and all the columns from our query and store it in a variable called albums. If we're only selecting a single album, we could use the command fetch, and then we don't need our loop. It just selects one row only. In this case, we want to select multiple rows, so we'll call fetch all. So most of the time, we're going to use fetch all in this class. Only on a page where we're looking up a single thing will we use fetch. So once this line of code runs, our albums should have some value. It should have our list of album titles in it. Now, we won't see anything yet on the page. I just want to try it out. If we get a blank page loading, then probably things are working. Means we didn't get an error. Now, if you're using a local web server like WAMP or XAMPP or MAMP, you can now load this up in localhost and you can try it. If you're not using a local web server, you need to upload your page to Azure or DreamHost, whichever server you're using. You want to create a lesson 3 folder and upload it and try it there. So I'm going to try it locally. So I'll go to my lesson 3 and load up. Okay, well, I didn't get any error, so that's probably a good sign, at least, that my connection worked and my query ran successfully. We haven't printed, so we don't, well, I'll try and break it. If I do title with a capital T, which doesn't exist, we'll see I may get an error. That error might get suppressed, but we can try. Yeah. Okay, I guess we don't know for sure if it's working yet. We won't really know until we try to show the data. So we only need a couple more lines here. So all of this stuff is going to be the same regardless of how we're showing the data, in a table, in paragraphs, as something else. So this stuff we just repeat over and over again. So now we'll use our loop. It's going to look like this. We'll use a for each. And then I'm going to move this comment inside my curly brackets. Now, I don't think we used for each loops in our C# class. For those of you who are in computer programmer, have you used for each loops at all before with Java? You probably have. So I've got two variables here, albums, plural with an S, and albums singular. Can anybody help kind of explain why do we have two variables and what does each one of these mean?
Well, albums is referencing the albums item that we created up top.
Right, so this is the result of all the query. It's got all the data in it. That's the albums, it's the whole set of data. So then what's this one?
Well, album is the alias that we're going to use to reference this in code later on.
Okay, yep. So if albums refers to the whole list, how many does this refer to? How many items? Just one, right? So this is plural, this is the whole list, and this is a single album. So as we're going through the list, whatever the current one is, we're calling that one album. Okay? So albums is the whole list, and album is the current one in our loop. Maybe I'll make a note of this. So albums is the whole collection of data from the query. Album is the current item in the list of albums. We've got two variables with similar names, but there's a reason why one is plural and one is singular. The plural is all, and the singular one is a single record only. Just like I could put you all in an array called students. Well, each one of you is a single student. So now here, we use our echo. So which variable represents the single album in the loop? Album or albums? Yeah, album singular. And what's the name of the column from the database we want displayed? We've got 5 columns. We have album ID, title, artist, year, and cover. Yeah. We want to display. Right, but now we're selecting title, but now we want to actually print that value to the page. So inside our loop, for every album, we want the title to print on the page. And we want that loop to keep going for however many albums there are in our database. 5, 5,000, 5 million. So now go back to your browser and refresh your page. If it's working, it should show you the names of the album titles printed on your page. Okay. And what does the error say, Milan? Okay, so access denied. So what does that error mean? Right, it means the database connection, it's not allowing you to connect to your database with the information you've provided. So now when I refresh, Now notice we haven't used any HTML formatting, right? We just used the echo command. So it doesn't look too good, but it is actually functional. It prints out each album title here. If we look at our source, there's no HTML. This is the unwrapped gift. Here you go, Raj. Here's your birthday present. I didn't bother to wrap it, right? You got what you wanted. It just doesn't look very nice.
That's what I did with
Okay. What could we do? How could we get this to print just each one on a new line? What could we do in our code? So rather than the titles printing across the page, at least after each title, we got to a new line. What HTML? We can use a little bit of HTML wrapping.
BR.
Yeah, we could just append on here. We could add an HTML break tag. So I'll use the dot, which is the concatenate operator in PHP. And then inside of quotes, let's add a BR tag. And then if we refresh it, we should at least get all the titles appearing on a separate line. So I'll go back and refresh. That's a little better. This is like our newspaper wrapping of your gift. It's not great, but it's something. There's a little bit of packaging around this, even though it's not beautiful.
I obviously can't tell if anybody else has pointed this out yet, but I think it's the fifth item in that list. That's actually the artist, not the album. It's just incorrectly typed into the database.
It's actually not, because their original yes, thank you. You're right. It is. I should change that. I could do that easily. Thanks.
Yep.
I'll just update it. So I'll set. You'll learn this in your database class in the next week or two by doing updates. There we go. Better. Thank you. Now I want to show you the importance of this being case sensitive. Again, I've used a lowercase t here because that's what matches my database. Let's say I use an uppercase T, which doesn't exist in my database. There's three possibilities when I refresh my page. It could work and I could get the list of titles anyway. I could get a blank page, or I could get an error. Which one of these do you think is most likely to happen? So you're thinking error? Any other opinions?
I think it might be blank.
You think it might be blank? Well, let's see. So the database is doing what we've told, but when PHP goes to output that value, it just treats it like a blank or a null. Okay, so our page doesn't crash, but this is actually not very good, right? Because people are coming to the page and they don't see anything. It would be better if it crashed, because at least then people could report the error to us. If you try doing this with a web page made with C#, like an ASP.NET page, it would give you an error. It would say object not set to an instance of an object. It would say, no, title with a capital T, that doesn't exist. And it would throw an error. If you did this in Java, it would throw an error. But PHP just says, oh, well, we don't know what that is. We'll just let it be blank, which is actually not very helpful to us as the developer. Question?
the same name, but it's still showing blank.
Still shows blank.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's one way we can check. The problem might be that your query is somehow failing. Here's a way that we can check. we can add on a property of our connection that will show us database errors. Because remember when I did it the first time, when I changed this to capital T, I didn't get an error, right? My page was blank. There was an error happening, but we never got to see the error message. So
What should this file be titled?
album titles. Set attribute. You have to give me a, hang on, I can't remember the command, but Google is my friend sometimes. Here's what we want, PDO right. PDO. And I think it's error mode exception. Yeah. If we add this line underneath our connection, it says once we've connected, if there are any errors with our database queries, not to hide the errors, but to actually print them to the page. Once our website is live, we probably don't want this line, but when we're developing, it's useful to add this in. We'll talk about error handling more in a couple of weeks. I think maybe next week we'll deal with error handling, but this is useful for debugging. So if it's not working, try it now and you might see an error message. When I add this line, so I'll just make a note here. So this is just helps with debugging. Debugging DB errors. Once I've added this line, I think now if I actually go ahead and use a capital T, it should show me an error message that before got suppressed. So I'm going to deliberately break it by naming my column incorrectly in my query. We'll see what happens now. Okay, I didn't expect that. Hold on, let me try something else. I'll try naming my table incorrectly. So this table doesn't exist. So now I get the warning, right? My table was not found when I do this. So it's not a bad idea to include that line. Do you see any more information now after you've added that?
Yeah, it's showing error at the line we just wrote.
Okay, and what, so I'm always gonna ask you, if you say I got an error, right, what else do you need to tell me so I can help you? I need to know what the error message says.
Undefined class constant ATTR in the file on line 12.
Okay, then something here you've got isn't quite exactly the same as mine. Those are 2 colons. So check your line 12 carefully against my line 12. Is it exactly the same? Okay. And your database connection? Did you have your save page working from last week?
Yeah.
Compare, why don't you copy that line from your save page, paste it in just above the connection on this line and see if they're identical. Just to make sure there's nothing different about them. If you still can't figure it out, I'll have a look on a break. Okay, which is we're about due for. Does anybody have any questions about what we're doing here? Okay, I think this is a good place for us to take a pause. So a few of you have need a bit of help, I'll come and have a look. I do only have 10 minutes, so I'll try to help if you've got minor issues. And then we'll come back and we'll do a little more with this. We're going to leave this page, but we'll do some other ones where, again, we're querying the database. Okay, I'm going to stop my video.